our podcast, Noise to Music, where we study relationships and use them as a springboard towards taking the noise that's in our lives and turning it into beautiful music. I'm your host, Chaim Levy. This is episode 2, entitled Emotions and Me. We're going to have a discussion about what is the role of emotions, where do we find them in the Torah, and how to discover if I'm an overly emotional person. So just to give a few examples, the first of all, it discusses a mother hovering over her nest. It appears in Dvarim Chaf Bet, Pasuk Vav, and the verse discusses you're walking and you see a nest with a mother and she's hovering over the eggs, and you want the eggs. So there's nothing wrong with taking the eggs, but you cannot take the eggs if the mother is there. You have to shush away the mother and then take the eggs. So we see from there just a simple case of where the Torah tells you have to be sensitive to an animal, right? Another situation is when up in Dvarim Perek Chaf Bet, chapter 22, verse 10, where the Pasuk, the Torah discusses you're plowing a field, and you cannot use an ox and a donkey at the same time. Why? Because the donkey, when he plows, he also eats and he disgusts the ox. And you can't do that to an ox. You cannot do that to you can't get him to be disgusted. So once again, we see the idea that the Torah tells us you should be emotional, you should be sensitive, you should be caring to an animal, right? How much more so to a person? In another case where we find that the halakha tells us, the Jewish law tells us that you should be sensitive to innate object. We know on Friday night when we make Kiddush, on Shabbat when we make Kiddush, whenever we make Kiddush, so we cover the bread. Why do we cover the bread? Because essentially when you're in the order of blessings, there's a certain order that when you have a variety of foods on the table, there's a certain order that it's supposed to appear, that you're supposed to make the blessings. This first and then that, and this by order of importance. Now bread is on the list, but Friday night, for whatever reasons they are, on Shabbat when we make Kiddush on holidays, so we make on the wine first. So essentially we're skipping over the bread. So we cover the bread so it shouldn't be embarrassed. So when was the last time bread ever told you, I'm embarrassed, please cover me, it's not right, I really feel shortchanged over here? Never heard that, right? But the halakha tells us that we should nevertheless be sensitive even to that situation. So you see that we're kind of required and encouraged to develop a level of sensitivity and emotions and feelings to, be it animals, be it innate objects, how much more so people. And we all know about the significance of respecting our parents and v'ahavta l'reacha kamocha, and you should love your neighbor like you love yourself, and so on and so forth. Such a valid and important point, to the extent where when they came to ask Hillel, teach me the entire Torah on one foot, right? So he made a reference that had to do with respecting your friend as if you would respect yourselves. So again, that develops and stresses the importance of being sensitive and being emotional and caring. On the flip side, we'll just give 2 short examples because I want to get into the meat of the discussion today, which is Vayidom Aharon. The pasuk says that when Aharon's children passed away at the inauguration of the Mishkan, of the temple, so it says that Aharon reacted by saying by Vayidom. He kind of locked up emotionally, didn't react. He didn't get sad, he didn't get depressed. He accepted it as the will of God. A very emotionless reaction. And we know he was a Kohen. Kohanim are known to be full of emotion and fire, so to speak. Additionally, we just read in the parasha that the Rachel and Leah, what happened over there? That Rachel was supposed to marry Yaakov, Rachel was supposed to marry Jacob, and she waited 7 years for it. The father told her, listen, it doesn't happen this way. By us, I know that your husband-to-be gave you a password, give it to your older sister, she's going to marry him, and you're going to be left on the side. She didn't know at that time that he was going to work another 7 years for her. She had no idea. She thought she was giving up everything, right? But we don't find anywhere that she complained, was sad about it, was depressed about it, lost herself, any level of sin, and so on and so forth. She did it. right? She moved forward with it. And clearly, Rachel is the emblem of motherhood in Judaism. So we find, the Torah places this like situation, this stress of it's almost, lack of emotion. It's kind of showing lack of emotion. So it's kind of, where do you go with it? What does the Torah really want, and how do I know where I'm holding so that I can react accordingly? Because the starting point, right? The starting point of growth is knowledge, and we'll talk about it towards the end. Okay, and how to react, how to perform, how to react, what to say. Be it if you're dating someone that is either very emotional, or you yourself are very emotional and sensitive, or you're married to someone that's more emotionally based, or you're more emotionally based, or one of your children is more emotionally based, right? How do we discover that? How do we see? Because if let's just assume that you're more intellectually based, okay, we'll kind of pin them up against each other, the emotions versus the intellect. If you're more intellectually based, right, and your spouse or your friend or your child is more emotionally based, and you react the way you see things, that creates a form of suppression, which is the last and worst way of dealing with that situation. So let's get into it. Let's kind of dive in. How do we know what type of personality I am? So I'll give a few examples of what might be a nice inclination, a nice understanding of, am I an emotional person with a heightened sense of emotion? Everyone has intellect and emotions, but do I have a heightened sense of it? So first of all, an emotional person will have what's known as emotional depth. What does that mean? They tend to form strong emotional connections with people, places, and things, and that creates some type of, that creates separation very difficult. Somebody who's very intellectually based, let's call it, right, then they kind of deal with the issue at hand, they kind of deal with the information that's there, and from there they make a decision. But an emotionally based person jumps over what might be transpiring right here and now. It's time to separate, it's time to leave, or whatever it might be, and they handle it in an emotional way, right? There is a nice little few lines that were written by a man named Pearl Buck. He writes like this: a human creature born inhumanly sensitive, meaning they have a heightened level of sensitivity, to him a touch is a blow, a sound is a noise, a misfortune is a tragedy, a joy is an ecstasy, a friend is a lover is a god, and failure is death. So someone who has a heightened sense of sensitivity, of emotions, they kind of take a situation that everyone deals with in a specific way, or in a monitored way, and it becomes much bigger, becomes much more emotional, could become more heated, and so on and so forth. So that would be one example, is what's known as emotional depth. Another example is deep empathy and sensitivity. For example, at an early age, if you found yourself in a situation where others were abused or mistreated, and it affected you differently than it affected other people, that comes from a heightened sense of emotion. Okay, emotional people have a tendency to be idealistic, very loyal and romantic, because once again, they're kind of like skipping what is now. A lot of leaders have a heightened sense of emotions and sensitivity because they're kind of looking towards the future. They're not paying attention to now. They have a certain sense that's developed within them. Okay, you also have a tendency to have a high appreciation of sensual pleasures like music, language, art, sound, sight, touch, taste, smell, right? Those are all things that are emotionally based. There are people who like to eat with their hands, and I'm not talking about a bowl of cereal, but I'm just saying they'll like to touch their food. They'll like to touch things when they buy them, or so on and so forth. Music, there are people that like to work with constant music, right? That comes from sensual pleasures. That's a heightened sense of emotion. Okay. In addition, they'll also be driven and drawn to spirituality, but everyone's drawn to spirituality and growth, right? But they have a heightened sense of it, right? You'll find that sometimes people call them like floaty, spiritual, flowery, in the clouds. They're not. They're very grounded. What is it? They see the world and they see life in a specific way with a heightened sense of spirituality. Okay? An intellectually based person has spirituality, has growth, has a drive, but their perception and connection to the world is in a different platform. Okay? Last example that we'll talk about is that a person who has a heightened sense of emotions also has many times feelings of the weight of responsibility on them. Okay, even if they're not responsible, when places where others don't feel responsible, others can kind of just walk away, they feel a heightened sense of responsibility. Okay, and so it's kind of like almost needing things to be in a perfectionist state. Okay, so you've discovered that either you're emotionally based, or your spouse is emotionally based, or one of your children is emotionally based. These are all relationships that surround you, or your coworker is very emotionally based. Like I said, we use this platform to grow ourselves, but focusing on relationships. Now, as we stated, it's so important for a person to be able to decipher that, because if you try and, as we mentioned in the beginning, if you try and solve something in your way, or someone tries to solve something for you in their way, and they're not understanding where the core is coming from, then it's not only not going to work, but it's going to cause feelings of suppression. There's something called emotional eating. You can't solve necessarily emotional eating just by having a schedule of food or not being around it. You got to go to the core. The core is what? That you are an emotional person, or something triggers your emotion and it expresses itself by wanting food. That's just an example of something. So the core of it is the emotions. If you go after that, if you try and understand that, if you try to reach out to that, then you can actually get somewhere. Okay, and so on and so forth. Now, what are some of the places that high emotions would bring us? We'll quote just a few. First of all, it can bring us to heightened levels of excitement, to overestimate our chances of success. You'll go on a date, it'll be 1, 2, 3 dates, and that's it. In your mind, it's closed. You guys are getting married because you're handling it in a tremendously emotional way, right? There might be some prior pain that's coming, and this is kind of the solution, or whatever it might be to that extent. At work, you get a job interview, and in your mind, that's it. You've closed the deal. You're hired. You're already taking that money and investing it in another place. Another situation that heightened sense of emotions can take us towards somewhere we don't want to be is anxiety. What does that mean? Areas of our life spill over. You translate and react. We all do. We all react to people through the lens of what's going on in our mind. Okay, we've spoken in the past about the idea that you can't love someone else if you don't love yourself. The reason for that is because the way that you react to yourself is how you react to others. So for example, if you're a judgmental person, then you will be judging others. You'll judge your spouse, you'll judge your kids, you'll judge your friends, because those are the glasses that you're wearing. Those are the glasses that you use. It's just like if you're late to work starts at 8:30 and it's 9:15 and you're still stuck in traffic, and there's somebody at a stop sign in front of you, you're going to beep the horn and get upset and yell. They're not doing anything wrong, but since you're tense, those are the glasses that you're using. So a heightened sense of emotion can also lead to a heightened sense of anxiety, and that spills over to other places in our life. Another situation might be that heightened sense of emotions can cause feelings of sadness and can thereby promote us to settle. You're sad, you can't control it, it's not in your hands, you just settle for whatever comes your way. We all know where that can lead. And last case that we'll bring up is it can lead towards obviously anger and embarrassment, meaning doing things that we turn around and say, oh, I just was overly emotional on that. I should not have said that. I should not have done that. It was just wrong, right? Whereas as somebody who's more intellectually based, or let's just say has their emotions under control, is not going to find themselves in those situations, because they'll automatically understand, I'm just being emotional here, and this is not the right reaction, right? So those are some of the places that a heightened sense of emotion can bring us towards decisions that we're not happy with. And we're just going to throw out some just ideas. We'll kind of tackle it in the next upcoming classes. But what do we do with it? I don't want to just leave you with that. But the goal is to get to a balanced sense of emotions and logic. There's a book, Willpower Doesn't Work, by Benjamin Hardy. He discusses the idea of the rider versus the horse. The horse represents the heightened level of emotion. The rider is the intellect. The horse is just this huge being and strong power and energy, right? But he's not organized. He's not structured. He can break things and doesn't really know where he's going. As opposed to the rider, doesn't have a lot of strength, but he knows where he's going. He knows what he has to be. So the goal is to find the balance between the rider and the horse, right? With that in mind, I'll just give some suggestions before we call it a day. Step number one would be to acknowledge that you're being emotional in that situation, or to acknowledge that your friend, spouse, child, coworker, whatever it might be, is currently in an emotional state. The Zohar, the Talmud says, when someone's emotional, when someone's upset, you can't talk to them because they don't hear you. Okay? Next step is decide what's the right way to handle it. What's the right way to do? Step number 3 after that is, where am I in relation to that I've deemed proper? Last case, and this is the last step, which is one of the most helpful, is understanding that time is your friend. If you are an emotional person, you find yourself in a situation where it leads you towards eating, anger, sadness, reactions that you don't want, and so on and so forth, realize that time is always your friend. I hope that you enjoyed it, and I look forward to our next episode. Thank you very much.